Our topic for today is teaching environmental law online, its benefits and challenges of online teaching. We would like to remind everyone of our house rules. Angelo, topic for today is benefits and challenges of online teaching. We would like to remind everyone of our house rules. All right. So for everyone, please let us know if we could record this session today. We will only start recording if all parties consent to the recording. Mute your microphone while waiting for others to join in and when not speaking during the session. Use also the chat box option if you have questions or comments, and click react button option to interact with our speakers and guests. Turn off your video camera after taking the pictures to lessen the amount of bandwidth for everyone in the meeting. The links to the registration form as well as the evaluation form will be sent in the chat box. Kindly check the chat box and fill out the registration form to confirm your attendance. The evaluation form will also be sent to your email and you may fill it out after today's session as part of your attendance. We remind everyone that the issuance of the training certificates requires your attendance to at least 9 of the 12 sessions. To formally begin our second session, we would like to welcome our first resource speaker, Professor Amanda Kennedy. Professor Amanda Kennedy has a PhD in law and a Bachelor's of Law with first-class honors. She holds a graduate diploma in legal practice, a graduate certificate in law teaching, and is admitted as a lawyer in New South Wales, Australia. She joined the Queensland University of Technology as Professor of Law in 2019. Professor Amanda's research interest falls predominantly within the area of agri-environmental law and include resources and land use law. She has conducted funded research on these issues under Australian Research Council and other industry grants, and has published her work in both domestic and international journals, books, including a monogram with Routledge, Environmental Justice and Land Use Conflict, the Governance of Mineral and Gas Resources Development. Amanda has taught across undergraduate and postgraduate programs concerning environmental law and natural resources governance, mining and resource law. She has recently contributed to a textbook on environmental planning and climate law in Queensland. Amanda completed a graduate certificate in law teaching through Monash University and has received peer recognition for her teaching practice, including the LexisNexis Australasian Law Teachers Association Citation for Excellence and Innovation in the Teaching of Law in 2014, and the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law Emerging Scholar Education Award in 2016. Amanda is currently the co-chair of IUCN Academy of Environmental Law's Teaching and Capacity Building Committee, and has recently edited a monogram on teaching and learning in environmental law. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our first resource speaker for today's topic, Professor Amanda Kennedy.
Good morning, everyone. Just checking that the correct screen is sharing and that you can see the presentation, Mary.
Yes, Prof.
Wonderful. It's fantastic to be here with you all today, and I'm really excited to be able to share with you some of my thoughts about teaching environmental law online, particularly the benefits and challenges of online teaching. And some of what I'll speak to you about today, we'll have an opportunity to expand on in much greater detail next week. So given that we have quite limited time to talk today, we'll jump straight in and look at these issues. But please, if you do have any questions along the way, feel free to either raise your hand or pop something in the chat box, and we'll have an opportunity to talk following this short presentation. So over the last 2 decades, the combination of technological advances and shifting student priorities and demands has really led to quite significant changes in the delivery of higher education. Students can now access learning materials around the clock through virtual learning environments. And there are a growing number of not only subjects, but entire degree offerings that can be completed online at universities around the globe. So it's fair to say that online learning, or e-learning, is very much now in the mainstream. But law has lagged behind other disciplines. Legal education has certainly looked towards the online learning turn, but it is definitely behind other disciplines. Now, in some cases, this has been due to quite specific barriers. In particular, law school accreditation requirements and admitting admitting bodies who require that learning is done in person. But despite some of those restrictions, we are certainly seeing evidence of e-learning adoption and innovation in the law. Now, despite that adoption and innovation in some pockets, overwhelmingly, law has tended to stay very much almost wedded to a very traditional approach. So it's quite typical to see that casebook and Socratic method being preferred in law. And of course, all of that was turned upside down last year as a result of COVID-19 and the pandemic, where we had a very abrupt and in some cases an unwilling transition to e-learning or online learning. So we had all of a sudden universities that perhaps weren't necessarily prepared and academics and teachers who weren't necessarily skilled in online teaching and learning being required to adapt and adopt these technologies almost overnight. And so from an e-learning perspective, and I'll talk about this in a moment, what we saw here was, certainly in my view and in view of others who do research into online teaching, what we saw here was not necessarily an exemplar of effective online teaching. It can be more appropriately categorized as emergency online pedagogy. When I use the term pedagogy here, I'm talking about the method and practice of teaching, the theories of learning, and how we develop an overall approach to teaching and learning. So what we saw in the wake of COVID-19 was not what we would necessarily call textbook or really good theoretical and well-developed online teaching. So I'll talk more about that in the presentation today. COVID-19 or not, online learning is going to be here for the long term. It is here to stay. And so what does that mean for those of us who teach in the law? Well, we need to think quite deliberately and quite specifically about what it means to teach online and what it means to teach online well or effectively. So certainly we'll touch on some of that today, but also in the session next week, we'll have more of an opportunity to really interrogate what that means in practice. So a little bit of scene setting there. What do we mean by e-learning? E-learning, of course, is the use of internet technology to deliver content and to construct learning communities. E-learning can be used either on the one hand to support face-to-face learning, but it can also be learned to teach individual subjects entirely online or to deliver entire courses in the digital realm. And e-learning can be used with a variety of different methods. So we can have synchronous methods, which is obviously what we're doing right now, where everybody is live in real time, or it can also use asynchronous methods, where students access content at their own pace and in their own time. So it's not reliant on students being connected and live. We have a variety of tools and systems that facilitate online or e-learning. So we have things like learning management systems, which is a repository that houses all of our content. We have synchronous interaction tools, things like Zoom. We have asynchronous tools like messaging functions. There are grading and feedback and assessment tools, and also digital collaboration tools. Now, some of these tools are really focused on replicating some of the features of face-to-face instruction, but there are other tools which enable the academic or the teacher to go beyond simply digitizing traditional content and to really get into very novel methods of interacting with students. And so this is really where we start to get into some of the more technologically advanced e-learning approaches. So what are some of the advantages of e-learning in law? Well, it offers a number of advantages for legal education and also quite specifically for environmental law. Most obviously for students who are managing work and family responsibilities, online learning can increase flexibility and convenience, not only for learners, but also for teachers. E-learning also exposes students to digital technology and enables them to develop online communication and collaboration skills. And that's increasingly important and being recognised by legal profession admitting bodies. There are some who argue that e-learning can offer economic benefits. This is particularly a benefit for our institutions, where more learners are able to be accommodated with fewer infrastructure costs, for example, buildings. Now, there are others who would argue that those economic benefits are illusory because, of course, we need to put other support systems in place to accommodate effective e-learning. One argument that e-learning offers an advantage in law is that it improves access to legal education. So it can be used to provide accessible materials to students with disabilities, in particular for students who may have a hearing impairment or a visual impairment. And online education can also be used to remove obstacles around needing to be physically present on campus. And this is certainly one of the advantages that we saw in the wake of COVID-19, where students were not able to be physically present on campus. E-learning was able to fill that void. E-learning can also provide students who are shy or are afraid of contributing in class with a degree of anonymity, and it can be used to encourage their participation. And so this is for students who perhaps may struggle with the more traditional environment of Socratic lecturing. An advantage that is certainly relevant in the environmental law space is that online learning and online teaching can potentially contribute to sustainability efforts. On the one hand, it minimises travel to and from campus, and it can also minimise the use of printed materials as well as physical facilities on campus. A study by the Open University in the UK has estimated that the production and provision of e-learning generates 85% fewer emissions per student compared to conventional face-to-face learning. Now, of course, there are other ways in which some of those uses are taken up. Sure, there is no travel to campus, but certainly individual students are, of course, still generating energy accessing and generating emissions accessing those materials off campus. But certainly there is research to suggest that it can contribute to sustainability efforts. But ultimately, the biggest benefit from my view of e-learning is that it offers a pedagogical benefit. Now, as I said earlier, pedagogy refers to the methods and techniques of teaching and the theories of learning that underpin them. And so one of the big benefits of e-learning is that it allows for a multimodal approach to teaching and learning. So it allows the educator to use a diverse range of formats, videos, for example, images, rich media, and to combine all of these and offer them to students in a way that taps into all of their different learning styles. So they're just some of the advantages of e-learning in law. And these advantages, and certainly the last one that I mentioned, is particularly apt when we consider the nature of learners in the current day and age. So on the screen there is a meme that I often like posting, because you'll see on the left-hand side there all of the different gadgets that now fit in the palm of our hand or in our pocket with smartphones. So we've had this technological explosion, certainly over the last few decades, where we've really seen online technologies and the real possibilities open up for what learners are able to do. And when we overlay this with generational change, and in particular, if you look more to the right-hand side of that graph, where we're talking about Generation Z or Generation Z, which are those citizens who have been born since 1995. These are our current children, and we're starting to see this cohort come through our universities. These are school leavers who are entering higher education now. They have been immersed in technology their entire lives. Indeed, they have not seen the world without technology. So they interact with technology in ways that perhaps those of us who came through previous generations have never done so before. And so that really speaks to the need to interact with these learners in a very different way. But of course, law schools have been slow to adopt these technologies, and I mentioned some of these at the outset. There's a perception that e-learning is inferior, and we have this very romantic notion of what happens when students and professors are in the same rooms. So we tend to uncritically replicate Socratic methodology, and we're not necessarily very good in law at looking at utilising some of these technologies to underpin our approaches. And of course, we then had COVID-19, which forced us to really look at these technologies. Now, one would think that if online learning offered all of these wonderful benefits, then of course, the disruption of COVID would have seen great results. But of course, that is not what has happened. And we've had very mixed experiences with online teaching during the pandemic. And the reason why that experience has been mixed and why online teaching has not been well received in many countries. And so it will be interesting to hear more of your perspectives about online teaching in the Philippines, is that the speed at which online instruction was activated was, as I said at the outset, very much this emergency online teaching. So students were forced online due to circumstances. The teaching was more geared around replicating the conventional face-to-face classroom rather than being designed for the online medium. And of course, in many cases, it was implemented abruptly with variable access to appropriate technological infrastructure and staff training and support. So that's one of the big reasons why we've had some mixed experiences with online teaching in the wake of COVID. Now, today I don't have a great deal of time to talk to you about these theories of learning, but this will be something that will be the focus of our discussions in the session next week. So what we're going to talk about are these theories of learning and how they should be underpinning our approaches to teaching and learning. So the problem we've had, I guess, with COVID is that we looked first to the modality of teaching. We looked first to online teaching as our approach, rather than first looking at the theories of learning and what it is we're wanting our learners to do. So if we're looking at our learners trying to achieve quite high-level learning goals about being able to construct meaning from content, and yet what we're doing is simply dumping content on them through lengthy 2-hour lectures, that recorded lectures, I guess, in the COVID environment, we're not really using the right medium for the type of learning that we're trying to engage. So I'm just putting this here now to highlight this for you. This is something that we'll focus on in a lot more detail next week when we have time to look at how you structure and approach the development of a course. So we have these three very predominant theories of learning. Behaviorism is at the base level, which views learning as a commodity that's transferred from teacher to student. And then it moves through looking at knowledge as being more actively constructed by learners, to the final point where we have constructivism that views learning as individual and controlled by the learner. And so we need to think at the outset about what it is we want our learners to do, and then design a learning approach from that, whether it's online learning, or whether it is face-to-face learning. And then we would choose our tools based upon what goals we have at the end zone. So we'll focus more on that next week, but I just wanted to plant that seed for you here this week. So now what I don't want to do is to say that online learning is fantastic and free of challenges. Of course, online learning has some challenges. In particular, the benefits of synchronous instruction can be limited online. We've all been there. We've all had fatigue from endless Zoom meetings, and I'm hoping that I'm not contributing to that here for you today. We know that the more sophisticated the technology, the greater the chance there is for technological issues. And in the academic space, we know that moving things online does raise issues around academic integrity, although in my experience, that is more of a perception issue, and there's certainly no evidence to suggest that things like cheating occur more in the online space than they do in the face-to-face environment. By far and away, the biggest challenge for online learning is engagement and student participation. And some of those challenges are typically arising where, once again, we're trying to use those same approaches that we do in the face-to-face realm and replicate them online. We need an entirely different approach when we're teaching online to the usual toolkit that we have when we're in a face-to-face setting. And so what I wanted to leave you with today was this quote that really speaks to the nature of online teaching. And it's quite an old quote. It's from the early 1980s and talking about the initial advent of teaching through video mediums. And the quote is that electronic media is simply a vehicle for delivering instruction, and it's not responsible for influencing student learning outcomes any more than the truck that delivers our groceries causes changes in our nutrition. So online learning really needs to be thought of as very much a tool. It needs to be underpinned by very clear and sound learning theories and an approach that responds to the particular goals of learning that the educator sets. So we'll have an opportunity to explore that in much more detail in the session next week. But for now, I just wanted to paint that overall picture, and I'm looking forward to hearing the remaining presentations today, which I hope really touch upon some of your experiences, I guess, on the front line in the Philippines. My contact details are on the slide there. And of course, outside of today's session, please do feel free to reach out and get in touch with me if you have any other questions. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Professor Amanda. That lecture was very informative, and the discussion on online teaching during this pandemic will surely benefit our participants for today. We are also excited for the continuation of your lecture in our next session. Now, the Legal Education Board would like to present the Certificate of Appreciation to Professor Amanda Kennedy for sharing her time, knowledge, and expertise as resource speaker during the Environmental Law Teachers Online Training Program second session. The topic, Teaching Environmental Law Online Benefits and Challenges of Online Teaching, held via Zoom virtual conference and given the 6th day of October in the year of our Lord 2021 in Manila. On behalf of the board, signed by Ana Marie Melanie D. Trinidad, Chairperson of the Legal Education Board. Thank you, Professor Amanda.
Thank you.
Before we proceed, now for our second session, or for our second speaker, she is a legal specialist with 21 years of experience in the field of institutional and planning dimensions of natural resources management, particularly on marine and coastal resources management. She is an MCLE lecturer and law professor in University of Cebu School of Law and a graduate of University of Philippines Diliman with a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry degree. She also earned her Juris Doctor at Silliman University and a Certificate of Attendance in Coastal Management with Masteral Units at University of Rhode Island Coastal Resources Centers, USA. She is now taking up her Master's of Law in San Sebastian College Graduate School of Law, and more particularly known as one of the two lawyers who are recognized by the Supreme Court as the steward of the dolphins and whales of Tanon Strait Protected Seascape in the landmark case of resident marine mammals and dolphins versus Reyes. Our next resource speaker is the current chair of the governing board of the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law and one of the founders and managing trustees of the Philippine Earth Justice Center Incorporated. She is a member of the steering committee of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Attorney Rose Lisa Isma Osorio. Attorney Lisa.
Thank you, Mary. I would like to now share my screen so I can start my lecture. So thank you for your presence today, and I hope that you will be able to learn something from the presentations that we have today regarding online teaching. And the earlier lecture of Professor Amanda is really to help us set the tone coming from someone who is well experienced lecturer and professor of law in Australia. So I will be focusing on the benefits and challenges of online teaching as a pedagogical approach here in the Philippines and focusing on our experience here. So we know the challenges of online teaching. I think that's the reason why we're all here. And we have really so many concerns, especially when we had to do, as Amanda said, emergency online teaching because of COVID-19. So I'd like to also address some of your concerns about transitioning to online teaching, which many of us have really had challenges. So Amanda already explained what pedagogy is, and it is the art and science of teaching, and really what teachers teach and what students learn also. And it also includes how teaching occurs, the approach to teaching and learning. And so we have to understand the different theories of learning, what are the types of learners that we are being faced with, and the way that we deliver our content and how the students will learn in the process. So we have had several, we know that there are several methods of delivery of instruction. So we are used face-to-face classroom where, we're fully, with our students inside the classroom, and we're able to really note their reactions whenever we teach. And so we're able to adapt and adjust accordingly. For blended teaching or delivery of teaching methods, this is basically using online, but in a way that the focus is really still there will still be some degree of face-to-face learning, while hybrid instruction would be more or less a type of teaching where there is a significant amount of time spent online, and facing the students would be limited because we're using online tools. But in terms of online teaching, it's fully online, so everything is delivered. The content, how we teach, and how we interact with our students would be fully online. So based on this, since we transitioned in the time of COVID to online teaching, we conducted a survey with the Legal Education Board sometime in 2020 about the challenges, and you yourselves identified what the challenges were. So majority of you identified internet connection, which is really what challenges most of us. And the internet connections are unstable. There are poor internet connections. I've had instances where, I myself would be challenged with that aside from the students. So that really interrupts the flow of your teaching, and really somehow the students with poor internet connection will actually be suffering from their recitations. And so recitations are simply hard to conduct because of this intermittent internet connections from both sides. It is also difficult to assess students' performance because we know that when assessment time comes, we don't know really. We don't. It's not foolproof whether or not the students are really not cheating, as we say, because it's hard to really monitor them. There are also lack of personal interactions, as you identified, and lack of outdoor activities, which actually sets apart environmental law teaching from other subjects that students are used to in law school. So before COVID, we used to bring them outdoors, have more activities where you can commune with nature, introduce them to different issues around them. But nowadays, because we're all online, we can no longer do those in outdoor activities. So based on a study that was conducted, there are actually multiple phases of responses to COVID-19. So we really the phase one was really in many regions transition immediately. We had to rapidly transition to remote teaching and learning in just about 3 to 4 weeks. And so we relied on Zoom, MS Teams, Google Meet, and other platforms during that time. And the second phase should actually be to add now the basics into these emergency course transition. So we need to ensure that there should be reliable computer and internet connections, and also support for academic integrity, and students with disability should be added onto that, after we emergency, urgently transition into the online teaching. And then phase three should have been, support from the institution to fully support students for the full term and prepare them for a full online delivery. And then the phase four would be when we emerge now from the new normal. There would be still, as Amanda said, online teaching will be here to stay, more likely in higher education. So we must have new levels of e-learning infrastructure, technology, and support that would be provided by our institutions. So this is what our pre-pandemic classroom would look like. You'd have a lecture in front of the classroom, and we use most often the Socratic method. But when we transition to online teaching, the question was, is it useful? Is it effective if we still use the same method of teaching, which is the Socratic method mostly? So what is Socratic method? Because we've learned this, we've learned this our form of dialogue between us and the students by asking them asking them questions and making them answer, so that it would stimulate their critical thinking and draw out their ideas and underlying presuppositions. And so this is really what we have learned, as teachers, as students ourselves, and which we have adopted when we became students, because not many of us have an education background like Amanda has. But for us, we just learn from what we saw from how our professors dealt with us when we were students. And so in terms of the voice of the students, there was a survey conducted by IALS in terms of what they think about the transition to online legal education. And by region, there were students who identified their challenges, and they said, many of them really said that their challenges were in social distraction, concentration, and self-motivation. And we see that in a lot of our students. For those of us teaching for a long time, it's really a struggle now for students to fully concentrate, especially in an online setting. And so they said, one student said from the United Arab Emirates, he said, studying online regarding law is the worst experience in my life. Nothing is understandable, yet they're able to pass without understanding. So that's really, the reality that we have to deal with. And because the students really see a lot of distractions, especially in, in some of our students who are living in just, with their families, they are often, spending their time in their dining table surrounded by their families while they are attending class. And I remember there was one student of mine who dropped off because of that condition. He said that he cannot simply focus. There were too many distractions because he was just learning from his dining table, and so he had to stop because of that. Another challenge also that was identified was actually, the training of professors like us on the use of technology. They also said that, the bandwidth was a struggle. There was no tech support, especially for most of us professors who are teaching from our homes. And so the students said really that we have to know how technology works, because they, as Amanda said, they are the Gen Z. They grew up with technology, and so we have to catch up to them. They're in fact more or less much more efficient than us. And however, in some of in the survey, they also said that they actually miss their professors, seeing their professors. And so, yeah, that's a good thing, right? So they 84% of the students stated that they miss seeing their professors face to face. So I think that's really a very good way of saying that, they would prefer face-to-face teaching, but then we have to deal with the reality. So how do we try to bridge the gap? How do we deal with these challenges? And for me, what I did was really to adopt a new mindset and really accept the fact that we can't replicate traditional classroom experience online. So we need to actually look at, the types of learners that we're dealing with. So, and today's students actually are really, different from the students of the past, if you've been teaching for a long time. And so there have been, articles that I've read where, there are 5 strategies according to this article where we can engage today's students. Like, we need to focus on research-based methods. We need to explain to them the relevance of what we're teaching, why we're teaching it. We need to provide the rationale. It has to be somehow relaxed and not very rigid setting. And you have to establish rapport. They need rapport. And so that's really essential, because necessarily have to be the traditional professor where you just step into the class and start with your lecture without establishing rapport with your students. So what are the activities that I did for transitioning that you can incorporate in online teaching? There were case studies that to them that where they can analyze particular situation or case scenarios in environmental law. There are so many. I know in the Philippines, it's very rich because we have so many issues as well. You can also engage in tutorials with them. Simulations, where I also use them, especially in providing for instance, mooting exercise when I'm talking about international environmental law, or a mooting debate format. So you can experiment in the different simulations. You could also give them reviews of articles and assign them these articles that they can review. Discuss current events, of course, so that there's relevance really in why you're teaching environmental law. You assign group problem solving or reports, and of course, you can also do structured discussion during online classes. So one of the things that I also learned, especially in attending the TTT program, is to use also online tools like Poplet. So here, this is an example of how students of mine have demonstrated to me their understanding about, one of the, classic cases in international environmental or the trade of smelter arbitration. So they can use it to illustrate the case and explain to their classmates what this case is all about. So this is another example, although not using Poplet, but because Poplet, you need to be online together, and sometimes they struggle with the bandwidth. And so I allowed them to, that's a form of adjustment. So I allowed them to use other forms like, PowerPoint and replicate what they can do in Poplet in PowerPoint presentations. But as long as they present, the different cases in one picture, so that, it's easy understandable. They're able to analyze, the relationships between cases like Costa Rica versus Nicaragua, vis-a-vis, another case on Australia versus Japan. So that's how I try to teach them these concepts. So just to take note, because I have a limited time here, you have to learn to update your skills in order to become effective. Remember that a virtual classroom is not the same as a real classroom. So, and technology also has its limitations sometimes. So the lesson that I've learned is you have to engage students at the onset. So you learn new tricks, and when you start your class, you can integrate gaming elements also to enhance student engagement and motivation. So here is one of my form of engagement. I think this was done early and when we started by Matthew. So I use menti.com to ask them what environment means, and you show to them their answers through this format. So using menti.com. Gamification in legal education has been really there's been so much written about, and so this can be used as well in our teaching, because according to Ferguson, their methods that we use is actually by asking them the case methods are actually only a fraction of the skills that are required for successful legal practice. So this is how he justified the why gamification in legal education is necessary. So he said also that another issue facing students is that the one size fits all teaching. They call it the Swiss cheese learning, and so we even if one of our students do not understand the foundational material, we tend to generalize everyone, and we have to move on and be fast in our delivery of our instruction, even and not even noticing those students that are hardly learning from this experience. So he said that gamification can have really more chances of, as I said, increasing the learning of our students. So we can have more games inside and outside the classroom, as he said. So you can include this the games in the classroom. You can have leaderboards, competition, collaboration. So really whenever I assign them simulations, it means that they're engaged outside our classroom, and they said that it's quite effective for them because they learn better. They also, the benefits of flipped classroom is also explained in that article, and I will be talking about it later on. So the second one is, you can plan out synchronous learning activities to focus on active learning inside your virtual classroom. So for instance, using Zoom, I assign them an article which sets the tone and synthesizes them about environmental issues, which is Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons article. And I asked them to create a mind map and group them accordingly and give them particular situations and reports. Like this would be after the breakout rooms using Poplet. They're able to produce their case study outputs using the digital mind map tools that I give them, like Poplet. So the flipped classroom is actually also the basic learning that we could expect that could be conducted more outside the classroom. So you can post lectures online so students can watch and listen at their own pace. And at the same time, when we come back to our classrooms, our virtual classrooms, that is, you can use the time more efficiently with interactive discussions, engagements, motivation, and applied learning. So the flipped classroom is actually a pedagogical model in which typical lecture and homework elements of the course are reversed. So you assign them assign them readings and videos or articles to read before class, and during class you actually just expect them to apply their key concepts in particular case studies that you assign, and you give them active feedback as well. So the value of the flipped classroom is really you repurpose the class time into a workshop where students would learn more about or inquire about the lecture content. They can test their skills in applying their knowledge and interact with each other in hands-on activities. So your function as a professor is really, our instructor is really to coach them, encourage them to engage in individual inquiry and collaborative efforts. So here, this is an example of what a flipped classroom activity would be. So offline activity, you design it to pick their interest, you drive their inquiry, assess their prior knowledge, and then you flip and engage by providing them online video lessons with engagement activities. And then finally, you apply and extend that learning during the classroom activities. So here, these are what I did, learning from also, what Amanda did and in her classrooms, to use Google Sites to create content for classroom. So students can easily access them from each module that I create. And then I can craft also my course syllabus better. Understanding each module that I deliver would have what learning outcomes should I have, what are the structure and the duration of my module, what are the learning activities. So it's easy for me to track what I've done throughout the semester and really enable me to identify the types of activities that I will be doing. So timely assignments and practice really and projects, another phase that you have to carefully plan and execute as teachers. So this is needed not only so we can ensure attendance, but also to enable effective learning. Finally, gauging performance. So you can have ways of making student assessments fun. So we have, our Schoology, which is our learning management system, which actually I found out later on allows me to integrate pictures whenever I have assessments or quizzes. And so it's really more fun for them. And they're also learning a lot because they're actually seeing the concepts being applied through these pictures. And you can also gauge your performance using Padlet. So another use of technology where, I can ask at the end of the semester students on what they really learn and really things that they appreciated and even what they can identify as issues during the semester. But also gauging your performance as a professor. But at the end of the day, you're still the same teacher. So even if you're teaching online, but you're just using different tools, and so we don't have to change what you know, but you have to change how you deliver the content that you know. So thank you so much and for listening. I will be open to any questions later on.
Thank you, Attorney Lisa, for sharing your experiences on teaching environmental law. As a law professor teaching in the Philippines, your insights on the transition of our law professors from physical to online settings is very enlightening. I'm sure many of our participants can relate and adopt the tips you've shared today to make their lectures more engaging. With that, the Legal Education Board would like to present the Certificate of Appreciation to Attorney Rose Lisa Isma Osorio. Gladys.
Oh, there you go. She was sharing her screen.
Okay, so the Legal Education Board would like to present the Certificate of Appreciation to Attorney Rose Lisa Isma Osorio, Chairperson of the Governing Board of the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law, for sharing her time, knowledge, and expertise as resource speaker during the Environmental Law Teachers Online Training Program. Second session, Teaching Environmental Law Online, Benefits and Challenges of Online Teaching, held via Zoom virtual conference given the 6th day of October in the year of our Lord 2021 in Manila, on behalf of the board, signed by Chairperson of the Legal Education Board, Ana Marie Melanie B. Trinidad. Thank you, Attorney Lisa, for sharing your valuable knowledge and insights to today's session.
Thank you.
Okay. So before before we proceed to our third resource speakers, we will be having a 5-minute break, and we remind everyone to be back after the break.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So let me introduce our next speaker. I think Mary has some technical issues. So our next speaker is attorney Donna Zapa Gagonia. She graduated from the University of the Philippines College of Law in 1981 and passed the bar exams in 1982. She received her Master of Laws degrees from the Dalhousie University, Canada in 1993, where she studied Natural Resources Administration, Comparative Environmental Law, and Indigenous Peoples. She graduated from the UP College of Arts and Sciences, Diliman, with a degree of AB Philosophy cum laude. She completed the summer orientation course in environmental studies at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños School of Environmental Science and Management. Then she collaborated with the CSUM faculty to incorporate an introduction to studies business, chemistry, biology, and others. Attorney Gasconia has been teaching natural resources and environmental law since 2011 in various law schools and currently at the De La Salle University College of Law and the Centro Escolar University School of Law and Jurisprudence. She lectures on environmental law and policy at the UP Law Center Paralegal Training Program and the UP IAG MCLA programs. In 1987, she worked in the Special Concerns Office under Secretary Fulgencio Factoran of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources to set up and initially handle the Indigenous Community Affairs Division. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Donna Gasconia. Good morning, Professor Donna.
Good morning. May I be allowed to share my screen? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Okay, I will. Thank you. I'm sharing my slides, but I don't know why it became so small. There. So I was introduced as a professor of 2 schools, but I also teach at La Salle, Lipa, and at the UP College of Law. So to the chairperson and commissioners of the Legal Education Board, your partners, the ABB, UNEP, IUCN, DLC, thank you, fellow professors, co-workers, compañeros y compañeras, mga kabatch, classmates, sisters, participants, good morning. So let me talk about how IT helped me with teaching environmental law online. So as any subject, communication really is important. And so we have heard about blended learning, but at La Salle College of Law, our dean, Emer Enhinco, already actually reminded us that we already have Canvas and that we should do blended learning. That was months before the pandemic. And so we were given tutorials, and this is what happened. In the beginning, there's face-to-face classroom teaching, but we transited to emails, asynchronous. And so I had to receive so much email. But then there is Canvas, which is synchronous. And La Salle has helped us really set this up even before the pandemic. And that was really a blessing for teachers like me who are, I'm a senior citizen. And so it was easier to convert to online teaching. And I would like to say what happened there. There were IT guys in the school, also De La Salle University College of Law followed months after that, just before the pandemic started. There were IT people in the school, in the main campus, who were always available to us, always available to us. And then there were also my students. At La Salle pa, it was so nice because the IT girl went to my classroom, helped me set up the canvas on my laptop with my students, and we made it work. Well, that is something really wonderful. And I'd like to tell you just now, earlier, I had a problem with my speakers. I couldn't hear the webinar. So fortunately, one of my students in La Salle pa, Nathalie, is here. So I chatted with her privately, direct message, and told her I can't hear anything. In less than a minute, she helped me, gave me instructions, and now I can hear. So, you know, our students are a big source of help for online learning. So let me continue this. The learning management systems that I use are Canvas because of La Salle, both LIPA and the BGC campus, College of Law. Also, Canvas is used by CEU. Google Classroom for those schools that don't have Canvas. Moodle, also for those who don't have Canvas. And Microsoft Teams, because practicing lawyers have to use Microsoft Teams for virtual hearings. But so initially, Canvas is smooth and simple, and there's IT support. Google, you have to search the internet. So as the same with Moodle. And so you will know which one really you would prefer. Okay, so here's how I assess them. I just use the three, Canvas, Google Classroom, and Moodle. I started using MS Teams at CEU, but we realized that some of my students using cell phones found it very hard to connect with MS Teams because you have to download the MS Office in your cell phone. So that didn't work. So as I highlighted here, what is really important is also video conferencing. Canvas's big blue button or Zoom can be incorporated in Canvas. Just have, the school has to pay for it though. Google Classroom will tell you use Google Meet. You can still use Zoom, but Google Meet is preferred. Moodle has no video conferencing tool. Therefore, that is something very important. Now, I highlighted some features there you can see in Canvas. The IT or the registrar will automatically give me the class list. It's there already. In Google Classroom, you have to do that yourself. You have to invite your students through the email addresses given to you by the registrar or the admin office. The same with Moodle. In Moodle, you actually have to enroll them. Now, I do give individual assignments, not just group or everyone's assignments. Canvas allows me to do that. Google Classroom allows that too. It's just that there's so many other steps. That's not available at all in Moodle. It will override any attempts at individual assignments, or you have to repeat everything. Okay, so we do have new responsibilities and challenges. And for internal challenges, the first one would be creating lecture slides. And, you know, a professor who just talks to her students who are so familiar with gadgets will not be as effective if you don't go to at least a minimum of their level. And so PowerPoint presentations really are a very important tool in online teaching. You need to use slides. If you can use video lectures, although they require some more time to prepare. And then there are recordings. So I put another application here, Prezi. Some of my students use Prezi. It's more audiovisual, but more content you can get from PowerPoint. Okay, so if you do have multiple classes, online teaching gives you opportunities because you can just copy paste. You can just copy paste your files and you know, in the same classes. And so also with quizzes, exams, modules, copy paste them. Just make sure you don't include the answers. And it's already paperless. I used to fill my locker at LaSalle with the student outputs. I don't have to do that now. It's all on file and I can easily access them so long as I organize them well. Unlike then, I would have asthma, allergic reactions. That's gone with online teaching. So that's a plus factor there. It's paperless. Now here's an example of a lecture slide on, I chose the topic Paris Agreement and climate change. You can do this and show them a slide like this. You lose half of your students, you know, and you can't monitor it. You lose half of them. Even if you see them in your screen, you lose half of them. So what do I do? What I do is I give this as an assignment in Canvas, in Google Classroom, Moodle even. So I tell them already, the assignment for next week's class is that you have to tell me or define Paris Agreement and define climate change. So they submit this to me online, which tells me they read it because they have to type it in. So I don't accept file uploads for definitions. It has to be a text reply. So that means they found it, they read it, and they typed it in. So nakadalawa na sila doon. When we discuss the topic in class, I'm assured na medyo alam nila yung pinag-uusapan namin. It's not the first time they're hearing it or interacting with it. But this is how I will explain Paris Agreement, climate change, and global warming. I won't, well, I can flash that slide, but I'll give it a few seconds and then go to this slide instead. Because this slide actually illustrates what the Paris Agreement is. It shows that the climate, global temperatures were tracked 425,000 years ago. And we can see why the 2 degrees Celsius cap in the Paris Agreement is important. Because it shows there, once you breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature increase, it can plunge the Earth into an ice age. And there were several already, as you can see, 425,000 years ago, and there's where we are right now. So actually there, I don't know if you can see my cursor. And then I have this photograph from a US source, and I like to show it with global warming because then they can see the storm, they can see the mosquitoes that have started to migrate from Mexico to the United States, and they can see clouds and fires. So that gets their attention because now they realize what the Paris Agreement is all about, why it's important to talk about this international agreement. Okay, now I also use infographics and short video clips, especially when I follow through with greenhouse gases and the ozone hole. Wouldn't it be nice to show to them exactly what the atmosphere is about? Because I do ask them, did you study this in undergrad or even in high school? And they, of course, say, but we can't remember, ma'am. Okay, here it is. The ozone hole is in the stratosphere, and they can see where the stratosphere is. And then, why is the ozone hole important? I show them a video clip. I tell them it's gaseous in nature. It moves, it expands, it shrinks. And therefore, what we do can actually be good or bad for this. And they can see actually which countries are directly affected by the ozone hole. You can see Greenland there. Okay. And that's from the European agency. Okay. So now we go to what we do in class, which is to discuss cases. I mean, case analysis is really important also in environmental law. Why? Because we are science-based, and therefore words don't express or illustrate as much as when we use maps. I have a map there. Use the actual situation to explain what the case is about. In fact, I ask my students to do the case analysis, and some of these photographs came from their presentations. So I just selected two cases to illustrate how online teaching was effective for me. And one is the case of Arrigo versus Swift, which is a US naval minesweeper that was grounded in Tubatahari. So there's a map. It shows where Tubatahari is. You can never presume that they know where it is. Now they see where it is. And then you actually see the minesweeper, how big it is, and how it was grounded in Tubatahari. And then you can see that it was salvaged, removed in sections by the US Navy. So it was so easy to understand that in this case, the writ of kalikasan was eventually dismissed. No environmental protection order was issued. Why? Because the petition was filed after the ship, the minesweeper was removed from Tubatahari, and the US government paid the President Aquino administration's damages for that. Sumut and academic. Easier to understand than reading through that. I have another case, this one more successful. This is the case of Court of Appeals case of Bishop Senzon versus Honorable Congressman Aliting of Baguio. And it shows the site itself. This is the Mount Santo Tomas Forest Reserve. And you can see, it says, welcome to Sitio La Presa. That's the mountain peak. What do you see? Strawberry farms. Is that natural? Of course it's not. And then you see hordes of tourists. Traffic right there in the upper slopes of Mount Santo Tomas. Then I put a poster, forevermore. This is the ABS-CBN teledrama, shot on location in Sitio La Presa. So what happened? Of course, Bishop Senzon and the other petitioners filed for writ of kalikasan, environmental protection order, and questioned the ECC. The court granted the environmental protection order to be permanent. Used to be a TEPO, temporary, became permanent, and they instructed the DENR people, how come there's a strawberry farm there? And put checkpoints. Don't allow tourists to go in this area. And you have to remove illegal structures. You have to remove the roads built by Congressman Aliting. They will remember the case instead of just, my students will remember the case because that's how we, and they probably watch this. This was a very popular show. So the question really was, yun bang ABS-CBN which produced this show, did they get an ECC before they started shooting? Probably not. So there was a violation of the EIA system. Okay, now going to the internal part of it. The internal part is this is available in this rubrics is in Canvas. So I'm using Canvas. You can see that I use assignments in Canvas where I put the lesson. There's a box that says what they have to answer, the guide questions. And then I have a criteria, the rubrics that tells my student, when you answer my question, this is how I will grade you. And then I actually expanded that rubric. You can see that I put points. So did they use the proper format to analyze the case? Full marks, 3 points. Did they identify the proper legal dispute? Yes, complete, 3 points. Incomplete, wrong issue, 2 points. But principal issue, no issue at all, 0. So when I click those boxes, Canvas automatically grades it. And there's the final grade. And when I say that, my student or the students will see it. So real time, once you click it, kita agad ng estudyante kung anong grade niya. No paperwork needed. It's right there. If you want, you can save it also as an Excel file, but you don't have to because it's in the cloud. Okay, so what are the external problems that we have? The first one is always internet connection. That's been my problem too. Talking to your students, then you get disconnected. Mary had is having problems probably like that. Or it's so slow. Whatever is being shared, the loading time is so slow. Schools have actually responded to that. For example, we know LaSalle, UP, and probably CU allows us to go to school and use the school's Wi-Fi for free because their Wi-Fi is really good. Before the pandemic, I would use really the Wi-Fi of the school. So all schools where I teach, we can actually go to the school premises and use the Wi-Fi for free. So you may want to consider that too. That's the support that the schools give us. Now, if we do have internet connectivity, what is important also is your personal computer capacity. So please buy the latest ones. I had a problem with a laptop that I had been using since 2000 or 2015. 6 years pa lang. Hindi na niya makuha yung content. The motherboard or something there just couldn't handle the content that my students were giving me or the data I needed to get from the internet. Don't bother, really buy a new technology. Now, I'd like to mention LaSalle offers us, I think CEU too, we can get a loan to get, better computers, laptops, or mini PCs. Minsan mas powerful yung mini PC. Anyway, we don't have to go to the classroom now. We used to buy laptops because we had to bring them to school. But since we're work from home, I do have a mini PC, which is more powerful than my laptop to do this. And then, of course, always the IT support from school. I cannot tell you how much the IT people from the schools have helped me. And, your files are stored. If you do have an LMS, Canvas, Google Classroom, even Moodle, your files are stored, recorded even, and sent to your email or automatically recorded. It's stored in the cloud. So you can use any computer and you can get it. But sometimes things happen and like I can't find my files. Call the IT guy. And the IT guy just tells you, don't worry, ma'am, I lost my files. I can't find them. The IT guys just tell you, don't worry, ma'am, I will restore everything for you. And exactly that's been done. They do it. Medyo, di ba, parang kaya ko namang gawin din, di ba, to really restore it, get it from the cloud. But they're there and they are so glad to give you the support. So why not? Why not, di ba? Now, what I would like to say is, it's impractical for the law school to assign an administrative staff in the law school to be the IT support because usually they don't know the LMS either. They're learning just like us. So it's better that there's a really tech guy, persons. In LaSalle, it was a girl, a lady, a girl really, student, IT, who came to me and told me everything. So easy. And Natalie, just earlier, as I said, just told me, ma'am, you do this. Less than a minute tapos. We do need persons and hardware and the software, of course. So what is my recommendation? My recommendation is this: to teach environmental law online, which is science-based, requires graphs and all that. We need IT support and the appropriate LMS so that the pressure to use whatever technology, how to get this thing into my slides is gone. We focus on what we have to teach. And so I really would like to emphasize for schools, those of you who have the capacity to influence your schools, maybe you are the law school deans or presidents or higher ups of the school, please choose the teacher-friendly learning management system. Really, please. And right now, really, for me, it's Canvas. And to me, Moodle is something I can say, hate because of the steps. I mean, so what do you use there? Well, LMS should have a virtual meeting room within the system, and it's allowed to record. It should have an automatic grading facility. It should have a grade weight categories to compute final grades. Para hindi mo nagagawin yun. At any given time, you click total grades. I can see how my students are performing. I can even click analytics and tells me this particular student was late. This particular student was absent. Or this particular student has been submitting everything before deadline. Wonderful. Also, the LMS can check attendance. It also, of course, stores files and provides easy access. And students can interact and submit output in the same LMS. When they submit your email, daming kasama doon eh. You have to search for it. And the chance of you missing it is there. So better that it's in the LMS and that they are enrolled by the IT unit and the registrar so that it's automatic. So that ends my presentation. I just want to say that further recommendation is the IT unit in school should be available 8 hours on weekdays, shifts, which is what's happening in LaSalle. So I know their names, what time I can call them, their email addresses. I can chat with them, voice chat, and really tell them my problem. And also, well, in CU, I know him. We all know his email address and his phone, so he has to respond to us. But I would say also that it would be nice if they can be available on weekends too, because we do work, with online teaching. We now work Saturdays and Sundays. There's no time limit. We can work at 4 in the morning up to 11 in the evening. So sana, when the problem occurs, meron din tayong matatawagan, makukontak, So thank you to the 2 schools where I teach environmental law and natural resources, CU and LaSalle BGC, College of Law. So that ends my presentation.
Thank you, Attorney Donna, for sharing your insights and recommendation on how our professors can enhance their online teaching methods. Undeniably, online setting brings disadvantages like disconnection issues and technical aspects. Nevertheless, it carries with it advantages which professors can utilize and take advantage of to make teaching more engaging and easier to our law professors. With that, the Legal Education Board presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Attorney Donna Z. Gasconia, Law Professor of the De La Salle University College of Law and Centro Escolar University School of Law and Jurisprudence, for sharing her time, knowledge, and expertise as a resource speaker during the Environmental Law Teachers Online Training Program, second session, Teaching Environmental Law Online, Benefits and Challenges of Online Teaching, held via Zoom virtual conference and given the 6th day of October in the year of our Lord 2021 in Manila. Signed by Ana Marie Melanie B. Trinidad, Chairperson of the Legal Education Board. Thank you, Attorney Donna. Moving to the sharing of best practices in online teaching, I'll give the floor to Mateo, who will be our moderator today. Matthew.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you very much, Attorney Donna, and to all of our 3 presenters today. So we will have some time for questions and discussions, and we're also going to hear from a couple of our attendees about some of their issues with online. I do think it's important, especially Professor Donna's mention of the issues of technology, both in terms of internet connection, which is always a challenge, as well as the hardware and the IT support. And I think maybe this is something that we can think about as we go forward in terms of having a survey, an anonymous survey with our professors to see what specific things they may need in terms of, do people have access to computers? Is that something that needs to be looked at as part of the development of good online teaching? So I would like to open up the floor for any questions and comments from anyone on the floor. So can I ask if you want to participate and you want to raise your hand if you use that button under the reactions link, and maybe we can have each of our three presenters spotlighted so they can answer some questions as part of a panel. So we're going to do this for the next 5 or 10 minutes and then have a couple of interventions and comments from the floor, and then we'll go back to some questions and discussion. So if anyone would like to ask a question to any of our presenters today, please don't be shy, raise your hand, and you can either or you can type it in, or just raise your hand, and we'll open up your video and microphone, and you can ask a question to Professor Amanda or Professor Lisa or Professor Donna.
Matthew, there's a question on the chat box.
Okay. So there's a question from John Ray Libiran. Can you share tips how we can minimize cheating during online exams? Obviously an important issue about, and who would like to go first? Anyone?
I can go first. Well, what I do is really to give them long questions and case study questions that will minimize the cheating, I guess, because they would be, they would be expected to answer them using their own analysis of the issues, allowing them to really be able to spot the issue themselves and not be able to actually ask them hypothetical or questions that expect them to just memorize some ideas and concepts. And so another thing, which has also been, we try to use the double video, the double gadget method, one gadget for taking the exam on and the other gadget being trained on them. But I guess there's been some, students who are really having difficulties on that because, our students are not really coming from the upper bracket. So they have just limited capacity in terms of their gadgets. And so, and anyway, at the end of the day, I guess it's really the values that you teach them and you say to them that, you conscientize them and say, it's really for your own good. But it's really, there's no, as I said, foolproof method to really ensure that there will be no cheating during exam, because if there's a will, there's always a way to do it if they really want to cheat. So yeah.
If I can just add there, I would agree with what Professor Lisa said. I think it also involves coming back and questioning what the purpose is of an online exam, and that really feeds into what Lisa was just saying. So is the purpose to test memory recall of students? If so, perhaps there's a different way that you can do the test, and maybe that's where you might need to look into online invigilated exams or proctoring, which is very expensive and probably, something that if you're already having issues with accessing technology, going to be a lot more trouble than it is worth in terms of measuring what it is you're seeking to measure from your students. So I think the first question is to really decide what it is you need to examine. And if you are trying to test those more of that cognition of students being able to apply the law to facts, then setting more of those problem style questions will certainly help to minimize some of that teaching, but some of the potential for cheating. But really the question is, what is the point of using that? And perhaps you don't need to use an exam. Perhaps there's a different way of assessing that knowledge. Perhaps it is better to have more of, say, an assignment-based assessment method rather than an exam. So again, it's coming back to those theories of learning, which we'll talk about next week, that really should underpin. Don't just assume that an exam is the best method of assessing learning outcomes in the circumstances.
Attorney, Professor Donner, I mean, you have some very innovative, assignments in terms of photos and images. So they obviously are very difficult to replicate. Or if someone uses the same, you'll certainly know.
Okay, I agree really with Amanda. There are many ways to assess a student's performance, but we are required to give them exams. That's a university requirement. So how do I minimize it? I make it very long. My exams are really very long. I mean, my students can say that. That's the thing, they don't want to enroll in my class. My exams will be, I have basic issue concepts they have to know by memory. So I do use the usual multiple choice, true or false, so they can just click them. The form is in the system itself. So i-click lang nila yon. So, but I do have essay questions, just like what Lisa said. My essay questions are not exactly what is there. It's the application of what they studied. So what they will do is they have to breeze through the multiple choice questions, true or false questions, to have more time for the essay questions, because those get more points. And they have to think about it. So how do you prevent them from cheating? They can't afford to not submit within the time, because it's time. The system cuts them off. So I keep reminding them that in the beginning, I did have 3 students who were not aware of the time, and the system submitted their exams to me with the essay questions, probably 30 points unanswered, and the system gave them a 0. And I can't give them any points anyway. So that's just 70 out of 100, failing na agad. So that was a lesson that before giving the exam, I tell them that this system will cut you off. So you better manage your time and make sure you have enough time for the essay. Now, of course, they will still use gadgets. They will still talk to each other, but they can't copy paste because it's a text reply. They have to type in their answers. Mahirap yung, it will take time to copy paste from the other one because it's a text reply. That's the way to prevent the cheating. But I would say I had to cope with gadgets, because even during the blended learning, my students had cell phones, laptops, tablets, even smartphones. I even had a student who had a smartphone. So wala nga siyang ginagamit. But he had I didn't even know how to, I don't even have a smartphone. I haven't seen a real smartphone until I saw him using a smartphone. So go ahead. And I said, besides, when we go to court, the more resources you have, the better you will win. Except if the judge tells you no cell phones, then that's the point. No laptops, okay. But otherwise, we are prepared. We have everything with us. So that's the way to do it. So the main question really, as Amanda said, is if you want to assess your student, there are other ways. I do give the lesson assignments. I give the quizzes every after session. So after the class, there's a quiz, 15 minutes. They have to remember what we talked about because it's just 15 minutes. They can ask each other. And I said, you should perfect this. You can ask each other, but they don't perfect it. Kasi the time is important. Besides, we're preparing our students to pass the bar and be good lawyers, to remember everything. So my exams are just part of the learning process of the student. That's how I think about it.
And I guess there is that challenge between a student who is maximizing the benefit of their access or use of technology, and someone who's actually either copying or cheating or helping others. And that can be obviously very, very challenging. I, of course, obviously, naive and innocent as I am, the idea of cheating on a law exam is as anathema as the idea of lying to court. You know, these are things that you shouldn't do. But I also understand the pressure on people to achieve and to excel is very, very strong. So there's the way of being able to provide some sort of constant, immediate response, and you can get quick quizzes along the way, so people actually have to participate and perform throughout the rest because the exams are therefore diminished in value. But then the structuring of the exams can be done to minimize. I guess you can't eliminate cheating. Is that also something, if people are going to cheat or break the rules, then that's something that we obviously can't fully prevent, which is why there are lawyers and laws in the first place. So.
I mean, you will find that students who are inclined to cheat, they will find a way to do it, whether it's online or in a face-to-face environment. Just picking up though on something else that Lisa said, we found it's also very helpful to remind students of that very issue that Matthew was just mentioning, which is they are going into a profession where there are certain standards and ethical duties that underpin that profession. And so again, reminding students throughout this process, and I apologise that I'm not sure what the provisions are in the Philippines, but certainly in Australia, in the various state admission boards here, we need to provide certification to the various state admitting boards that students have not been found guilty of any academic misconduct. So certainly reminding students of that, and potentially even incorporating it as a part of their exam participation, requiring them to make a statement or a certification that they have only spent the required time on the paper, or that they have not consulted anyone. That can also just help to act as a deterrent by reiterating those professional standards that apply, that we expect of them as students as much as eventual professionals.
Yes. Matthew, can I add? The way I can tell cheating is copy-pasting. It's so easy to catch. Because it's online, I can just compare the answer to this number of this student and that student. It's all the same. They make the same mistakes. They make the same correct answer. So there's a box that says there, this is the same answer as student ganyan. I also go to the other one. This is the same as so-and-so. And in essays, if they copy paste entire paragraphs of the document, I don't give them points. Because I will put, this is copy-pasted. Where are your own words? I want to see your own words. Explain this. So no points. That's how I deal with cheating. I mean, so hard really,
And I think to go back to John's question, it really is using a combination of all of those levers. So having the plagiarism detection things like Turnitin or whatever you might be using, combined with questions that are more difficult for students to fall into that copy pasting. So whereas Lisa said earlier, you have a more detailed problem-based question that they need to think and apply the law to the facts. And then as Donna said as well, setting time limits on questions. All of these things combine to really make it more difficult for students to engage in academic misconduct. There's no one way of being able to prevent it, but I think using that combination of methods certainly assists.
So there's a few more questions. So one question was, I guess it's for the Legal Education Board, do we see online distance education and learning as permanent migration of programs? Which I think also raises an interesting question for those universities who are not in the major metropolitan areas, that do a lot more distance learning. Are they likely to be able to keep going on distance learning and distance education? Is this, and I think Amanda identified this, is this really, there is going to be a migration. We are going to see more online courses, even if people can come back to campuses in major cities perhaps. But in remote and distance education, online learning can still be a way of expanding the opportunities for students. Does that?
If I may answer, Matthew,
Yep.
for Leb. Yeah.
Thanks,
So,
Jojo.
yes, at present, we are really doing our survey to guide us on how to proceed, because we also saw the benefits of online learning, especially on allowing the availability of legal education to as much as the legal education system can accommodate. Like, you could just imagine if we go online, it could reach the farthest corners of the Philippines, and we have transportation problems. We're a country that is still struggling with economic issues, and we have students who would really want to go to law school, but law schools are situated in areas that are far from the residents, and it would really cost need a lot of resources for one to access legal education. That is really in the mind of the agency. But then we also saw we have already a little information that now we have more with the sharing of Professor Donna and Amanda and also Lisa. Those are really inputs to our policy making. That is on the table. We have already made surveys with students and with law faculty members, and from the data that we will gather from this will help us come up with a policy. But definitely, I agree with Amanda. I think the way forward really is to know more about online learning and be able to have the capacity to go and use this technology without sacrificing quality. So no firm policy yet on that it will become permanent, but definitely we already have a LEB memorandum circular that provides guidelines on what we call blended learning, allowing already different ways of different platforms or ways of delivering learning to our students. So it's already there. So that's how I would answer that question. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. And look, there seems to be some really interesting comments about this idea of online cheating, or importantly, the technology that's developing, obviously, to catch people who go outside of Canvas to check other sources. And again, from my background, when I did law, we had at the University of Sydney back in the 1980s, we had sort of 100% closed book exams, which I thought were the best thing because it just meant you had 2 weeks of cramming. But they were the worst thing because I really had no recollection of many of the subjects because it was just all intense, just studying. So we've obviously moved a long way from that. I think in terms of the whole pedagogy. At this point, I would like, before we go to another couple of questions, I would actually like to ask Prof. Marjorie is going to give us a bit of a comment and a short talk about some of the work that she's been doing in terms of online education and things.
Thank you, Mateo. Good morning, everybody. Happy Teacher's Day to all of us. So actually, it was requested to share our best practices here in Father Saturnino or UC University, particularly in the NATRES subject or the natural resource subject. For us, during the onset of the pandemic, we have been presenting local documentaries here in the Philippines. So there are actually available documentaries. So this documentaries actually depicts involves how this community live, and they actually rely on their living or how they live to the natural resources. So because prior to the pandemic, we have been going to several communities and trying to immerse ourselves. But then, syempre, it's no longer viable today. So I just presented to them several documentaries. Good material of it, actually, it can be seen in the YouTube. So, for example, Paraisong Salat by Cara David. Cara David's documentaries are actually very helpful because it actually enriches the students. And after the presentation of the documentary, I asked them sometimes very personal questions because we wanted to have that enriching engagement with the students wherein they can, and those videos or documentaries are actually very inspiring and very heartwarming because it tells us the story of the IPs and the people living in that community relying on natural resources. Now, it's also really very good to avail of the NEO LMS or the learning management system provided by the university, such as what our speakers have been saying. It's really true. According to Attorney Donna and Attorney Osorio, this learning management system has been making actually my presentation or my grading system with the students easier. So, for example, I can give them during the asynchronous classes. So I give them or assign to them individually or sometimes by pair or by group national laws involving environmental laws. And then they will look or write through their LGUs because at the start of the class, I ask them where they are living or where they are working so that I know that they are really asking the LGUs through writing that they wanted to see an ordinance, whether that particular ordinance, project, or program actually reflects the national environmental law. And then I also ask them, what are the gaps between what they see in the reality, what they see in that particular documentary, with that of the project or the law being implemented by the LGU. So blended learning is actually very advantageous for law students, especially in ATRES, because they could actually manage their time. So when we go back to the class, they can present their evaluation and critical analysis on that law, on that particular gap they have seen. So, and then another one, because we have been exposed to ULAP activities, our clinical legal education program in ORIUS, and considering that we have not been going to the community, we have this ULAP FB page. So I assigned students to make infographic of certain environmental law and then give them deadlines to post that in our ULAP FB page. Of course, before we post it, I'll check on the infographics because as our speaker said, today, parang letters lang talaga ang makikita mo. It's no longer helpful, but infographics can actually encourage learning, not only with the students, but with those who can see the ULAP FB page or the post there. And then we also utilize group chats. Actually, every group and every class, we have group chats. And I encourage them to really message me. They can message me through the group chat or through private messages if they have concerns to our classes. So that's it with us here in FSU.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Marjorie. And we have Warren Concepcion. I think you also have a few thoughts to share with us as well. Some experience.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. Actually, I'm teaching banking laws and as well as clinical legal education courses in Lyceum and other law schools. So, by the way, I want to greet everyone a happy Teachers Day. And I just a shout out to Attorney Donna Gasgonia. So I agree with what Attorney Donna has said earlier because I'm I was a student in environmental law in CEU. So, ma'am, good morning. So, just to share some of my best practices. Actually, as mentioned by our resource speakers earlier, the current pandemic situation has forced us, including the institutions and the professors, to increase our reliance on e-learning and to quickly convert face-to-face activities into a distance learning process. I guess most of us here, including me, are not technologically savvy, but the situation forced us to adapt into this new normal in delivering lectures and lessons in our classes.
Yang iyong
So, so the
yang
actually
iyong
this
mask galing yan sa amo.
So this online training program, so thanks to LEB and ADB, and as well as to other capacity building seminars that I have attended to in developing distance learning course, helped me so much in designing, developing, and delivering my courses or my class or my subjects. So the first thing that I adopted and I applied in my classes during this pandemic is to conduct at the start of the semester a learning style inventory. So for my students, so I asked my students to to accomplish this inventory for me to know their specific learning style. So since I'm teaching clinical legal education program or subjects, so basically I'm adopting this experiential learning. So I need to know, since they are all adult learners, I need to know their learning styles. So this will help me in developing my teaching methodologies during the semester and moving forward. I also used, as mentioned earlier, also by other professors here, use both asynchronous and synchronous method of delivery. So I use Google Classroom as my LMS, and I post there my lessons, the case readings, etc., for them to read and study prior to our synchronous or live session or discussion. So as well, I aside from that, in designing and developing my contents or lectures for my synchronous and asynchronous learning modes, I adopted this so-called absorb, do, and connect principle. So in creating content for this every category, so I need to infuse activities. For example, in the absorb category, so it's the lecture time. So I gave them professional articles, book summaries, case studies, films, videos, podcasts, blogs, etc. So in the do category, I infused activities like peer coaching, group activities, games, scenarios, role playing, and even simulations. And for the connect, since I think this connect category is the very most important, so I make sure that the students participate in order for them to close the gap between the knowledge which I infuse in the absorb category and the skills which they learn in the do category. So they need to close that gap. So we professors should be mindful of the activities we design, since it is in this phase, actually the connect category is where our students expand or reflect on their learning experiences. So the example activities can be a discussion boards, coaching pairs or trials, small work groups, mock trial exercises, and as well as presentation to the plenary with feedback during our live sessions. I also make sure to make my contents interactive because I do believe that there should be a good balance between the provision of information and the students' active engagement, considering that since we are in online, so yung attention span natin medyo kakaunti or medyo maliit lang. So I used infographics and gamifications, mga games, to boost engagement and learning. And lastly, there is also one thing that I have learned in these trying times, and I make sure to apply them in order to encourage engagement from students. And this is actually I'm recommending it also to all of you to always have a pleasant personality, infuse laughter. Actually, I do TikToks. I love TikToks. So, and have a caring attitude kasi they these are all very important for this for our students in these trying times. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Warren. A really good idea. The pleasant personality and the engagement, I think, is really exciting. So I am noticing the time. I would like to ask our presenters, Professor Amanda, Professor Lisa, and are we all here? If you would like just to make a short sort of concluding statement. Thanks, Professor Donner. I couldn't see you on the screen there. So if you'd like to make a sort of a short comment, and Amanda, of course, will be with us next week. So a sort of like a concluding sort of observation. Professor Amanda?
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just waiting for one of the others to go first. You know what, something, I heard an example not long ago that in the early days of movie theatres, viewers in the theatres would watch the screen quite close to the front, and a black and white curtain would part before the film started. So the idea was that it would replicate a traditional stage performance. And obviously it didn't take Hollywood too long to realise that moving pictures, you know, audiences didn't come to see a conventional live play. They were coming to see something new and exciting, a totally different mode. And we're in the same boat here. Our students are not coming onto Zoom to see the same thing done in that way. We've got the tools and the capacity here to offer something very different and very exciting using those digital tools, but we need to use them properly, and they need to be underpinned and guided by learning theory. So we'll come back to that next week in a little more detail and really unpack what those theories tell us about how people learn and how we can then choose the most appropriate tools to deal with some of those things. We may not get to talk about TikTok too much, but we'll see how we go.
Thanks. Professor Lisa.
Yeah, I think they would say that, you know, teaching environmental law is more fulfilling, and we're considered really a different breed of professors compared to other professors who are teaching bar subjects. And that's a challenge that we have in the Philippines, because the perception that, well, students will not really give so much importance to environmental law because it is a non-bar subject. That has been the struggle that I had for the longest time. But anyway, to make the students more excited to go to your class, you know, to learn a lot, it's really to how it is possible to apply the concepts, the doctrines that you teach in the real world. And I think, you know, giving them the situation and giving them the challenge and giving them the skills to be able to contribute in the future, especially future of environmental law in the Philippines, is really quite important for me as well. So my goal is really, as a teacher, is to really train them as future environmental law champions in the country. And that's the driving force that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Donna.
Yes, maybe I can add, because Warren just mentioned TikTok. I do use, not me specifically, but my students, when I ask them to present concepts or cases, they use video clips, sometimes of themselves, like in a dialogue, or they will actually get clips. I do use Ghibli movies because they're very environmental and they're popular among these students, and they know about it. So I ask them to actually analyze that movie. And so I guess that's what I'd like to add. But I haven't tried TikTok. Maybe I should. Thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed. And on a TikTok note, maybe we can have the environmental law TikTok challenge or something like that. I don't know. So look, can I thank all of our presenters today? Rich, very, very great buffet for World Teachers Day. I still remember my environmental law teacher back in 1988, Nicola Franklin, who inspired me to, 35 years later, I'm still doing this. And I also want to say that we ran an online 7-day environment ETTT for the in India, and Professor Amanda and Professor Lisa was there. And it was interesting also hearing a number of the academics there talking about exactly the same types of engagement with students, which I think is really interesting because it shows that there is a generational change that, as Amanda said, you know, these are people who have grown up with technology in a way that, you know, I still, you know, remember getting my first smartphone. I still remember sending my first email. We tell that to our younger students and they just don't believe us. So it is this sort of idea that we've moved on into a way that requires us to also adapt in a way that sometimes, you know, can be also quite challenging. So again, thank you all very much for sharing your experiences and great knowledge with us today. And I'd like now to hand back to Mary Ma'am for the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everyone. All right, as a last minute reminder to everyone, kindly fill up the registration form and the evaluation form for your attendance. The evaluation form will be sent to your email after this session. We will also send to your email address the link to our next session on October 20. Kindly check your inbox and spam messages. Should you have any issues or concerns with the Zoom links, you may contact our team through gabriel.matola@leb.gov.ph. Again, compliance to at least 9 sessions is required for the issuance of the training certificate. We hope everyone gained valuable knowledge on today's topic. And maybe next time we can schedule a TikTok schedule for everyone so that we can experience what one of our participants shared today. Happy Teachers Day, everyone, and see you on October 20.